Hey guys, welcome to yet another recent viewing video, and I had to sit down and take a moment to talk about a movie that I watched the other week, well, last week. This little movie right here, 50 Shades of Grey, the phenomenon, the book phenomenon. I feel like, excuse me, after having watched this movie, I'm not sure what to think about this as a whole. I suppose if I were to look this up here while I have it on Wikipedia, just for the heck of it, since this has been out long enough that it's released on Blu-ray and DVD, it would be interesting to see how much money this movie made. Well, okay, yeah, I guess I should have figured that. $40 million budget, box office right now of almost $570 million. So yeah, it was bound to make a lot of money for sure. This came out in theaters right before Valentine's Day, and then came out on Blu-ray on, I believe it was May 8th, something like that. Let me look at this here. Yeah, May 8th, Friday, special Friday release date. Normally reserved for movies like the Twilight series and Hunger Games and a lot of these book-to-movie adaptations, although this is far from being a young adult one. But anyway, if you've been living under a rock and you don't know anything about this, 50 Shades of Grey is the first book in a trilogy of books, the 50 Shades trilogy. And this is the movie based on that first book, because anytime a book becomes super popular, it's going to get a movie made of it. As I mentioned, the aforementioned Hunger Games and Twilight and, Divergent and any of these other ones, Harry Potter. But this one was a little bit different. This one was born of a lady who was writing fan fiction for Twilight. I don't know what kind of fan fiction from Twilight would turn into this, but that's where it came from. This lady, who I keep mentioning her as just this lady. I should probably just go ahead and find E.L. James. That is the name of the lady who wrote 50 Shades of Grey. I'm going to go back over here real quick and just make sure. E.L. James, yes. Born Erica Mitchell, 52. Fan fiction. Let's see, I'm reading from Wikipedia. James initially wrote fan fiction under the pen name Snow Queen's Ice Dragon, with her most notable work being a Twilight fan fiction that eventually developed into 50 Shades of Grey, which was subsequently adapted into a film. James has spoken of her shock at the success of the book. The explosion of interest has taken me completely by surprise. James described the trilogy as my midlife crisis writ large, all my fantasies in there, and that's it. She did not start to write until January 2009, after she finished Twilight Saga, and she hasn't stopped since. I mean, that's a cool story. Discovering fan fiction in that time. She wrote 2 fanfics and planned on doing at least one more. After that, who knows? In August 2013, sales of the trilogy saw her top the Forbes list of highest earning authors, with earnings of $95 million, which included $5 million for the film right to the. Okay, so there's a little bit of a story about the lady who wrote this trilogy and how it started off as a Twilight fan fiction. And I was telling someone that I work with how after I watched this movie, and I'll get into some more details here in a moment, but in this movie is a lot like Twilight. It's about a woman who encounters a mysterious gentleman who she's attracted to and she finds herself interested in, and who is, for some reason, whatever or another, kind of maybe unattainable or standoffish or whatever, or at least she thinks this would never happen, but due to reasons he becomes interested in as well. At the beginning of this movie, Dakota Johnson, who plays the character of Anastasia Steele, she goes to meet Christian Grey. I need to go on here and make sure that I am getting all the names right. Wow. Pardon me for a moment as I click away. Okay. So, yes, Anastasia, or Anna Steele, meets Christian Grey, and she is standing in for her roommate who was supposed to go and interview him. This is in the movie, because I don't know if this is to the letter as far as the books go, but from the movie, she goes to interview him in her place and asks the questions that she had asked. And he seems to be putting up with the questions, essentially. At one point he said, well, do you have any questions for me? And she says something along the lines of, why do I get the feeling that from everything I've asked you here, you haven't really told me anything about you, or something along those lines. And that seemed to hook him. That seemed to be, okay, the light just came on for him. This lady's a little more interesting, a little more appealing in a way to him. And from there, okay, I watched the movie. I was tired because it was late at night. I do that way too often, sit down and watch a movie at like 10 o'clock or after, with having to go to work the next morning at like 6:45, 7 o'clock in the morning. So sometimes I am tired and I fall asleep. In this movie, I fell asleep here and there, but it was never for more than a couple of minutes. I don't see how I could have missed a whole lot. But I'll be honest with you, there was just a lot of kind of the typical stuff you find in these sort of movies. Them going out on a date, or them talking, or them having breakfast, or of course in this movie, because Christian Grey is, well, this is how it relates to Twilight in my opinion. The male character has something about him that makes him uber mysterious, uber unattainable, and makes him somebody who the female lead should not have anything to do with. Edward Cullen in the Twilight movies was a vampire. Christian Grey in this movie is into domination. He's into, like, I'm stupid and naive about this kind of stuff, but like the BDSM scene, the domination stuff, the S&M and all this, submissives and dominance and all that kind of stuff. I don't really know all that much about it, but that's his thing. He gets off on it, and when he has these, not necessarily relationships, but these trysts, this involvement with these people, whether it's for a long time or one time, it has to be in a very specific way. And he basically, as he starts to kind of feel things for her, at one point he tells her, we shouldn't do this, you shouldn't be with me, and she's intrigued. But she also, at one point, gets to go see like his playroom, his little place that's full of all of the whips and flogs and bindings and things where she would be tied from the ceiling and all this kind of stuff. And it's kind of, I don't know, just for me, it was kind of hard to really wrap my mind around it. There's a lot of sex scenes in it, and he eases her into some of the things that he would be into, and she goes along with some of it, but there's resistance on both sides. Like I said, it reminds me a whole lot of Twilight, like them dancing around the vampire thing, and you shouldn't be with me, but I want to be with you, and I want to. Of course, in Twilight, she wanted to become a vampire and commit herself to that life altogether. In this movie, Anna seems to be willing to give in to some of the things that he's into, but at one point later on in the movie, there's some spanking involved, and I guess in her mind it wasn't sensual and pleasurable spanking. It was meant to hurt and punish, and that seemed to put her off to it. And yeah, like I'm reading on the plot synopsis on here, Anna concludes that Christian is wrong for her and his practices border on being deviant and excessive, and leaves. And at the end of this particular movie, basically that's it. They're not together. And I know that was nothing decipherable about what I just said about this movie, but I'm still having a hard time kind of wrapping my brain around it. Basically, I guess it just all boils down to two people who want to be with one another. She wants to allow a little bit of what he's into her life, but not too much. She just can't go there. And she wants him to be a little bit more open to a normal relationship, a romantic type relationship. And he starts to gravitate into that just a little bit, but he also kind of holds back from it. Because, well, I imagine we're probably going to learn more about him later on. I imagine if I had read all the books, I would already know at this point. It seems like there may be something in his past that all this is going to be attributed to. I don't know. Don't sue me for not knowing for sure. Like I said, I was just a guy who wanted to know kind of what the fuss was about. And it's not a bad movie. It's not the greatest movie of all time. It's definitely very interesting, though, and I do want to check out the rest of it as it comes out. A recommendation? I don't know. It may not be everybody's cup of tea. There may be some people who would just be completely turned off by all that domination stuff and all that stuff that borders on like pain and pleasure, and so I guess you just have to decide on that for yourself. Also, now that I've seen the movie and I haven't read the books, I will picture Jamie Dornan and Dakota Johnson as those two characters regardless. My friend of mine at work, who I talked to the movie about, her opinion was she didn't really see Christian Grey in this guy who was chosen to play as him. So, by the way, the director of this movie will not be back for the future installments because she and the author, E.L. James, really fought and disputed a lot of stuff in the making of this movie. So there's no telling if maybe this movie was just so far off from the book. But it made a lot of money. It was a big deal. I'm kind of into those controversial things and those things that everybody's kind of talking about. And this was one of those that I just couldn't pass up. So anyway, there's my thoughts on 50 Shades of Grey. That's it for me. See you next time.